As you looked at the south corridor, the majority of the focus area or priority area dots focused on this area between the bridge crossing of the South Fork of Palouse River to the Palouse River Drive intersection. Again, some yellow dots picking up as you head a little bit up near the South Main Hill, and then a few other priority dots as you head down near the Sweet Avenue entrance and areas near the South Couplet. And as we looked in the west, probably we had several, mini green dots near the Palouse Mall location with their landscape buffer that exists there. Areas that were identified as priorities were really this corridor segment between War Bonnet to the western edge of the Palouse Mall property. We had, obviously generally positive comments as you headed across Palouse Mall property, and then we were back into areas of improvement and high priority as you approach the Line Street down to the Llewellyn 3rd Street Pullman Highway intersection. So focuses of priority here and down at the eastern end of that corridor. We then took that information and developed a project list. So this was a list of all potential project sites and general description. We kind of had a relative magnitude of cost comparison. That's just low, medium, and high. These were very vague, general numbers. And the steering committee worked to develop that draft priority list and identify those sites for the council's consideration. So we again took our Google map and refined it to identify individual project sites. They were identified with a project ID and a general description. And then we put together a spreadsheet that identified each of the project sites in the corridors, a general description, relative magnitude of cost, and a priority ranking. And so that information was provided to the steering committee that then went back and ranked that information and provided it back to staff for us to prepare the recommendations for the council's consideration this evening. So that gets us to the preliminary recommendations, and I do call it preliminary because the project isn't done, but this is kind of a mid-project report to the council. There are some sites that have been identified for potential design work, and that's really was the council wanted to have the ability to review the project and decide whether we moved into design on the sites that have been identified for improvements. And so this is kind of a mid-check-in point and a discussion of the sites that could be considered for design for improvements. But there are really 6 overall general objectives that were identified by the group, the first of which was to improve the appearance of the existing developed private properties through increased property maintenance, street tree, and landscaping installation. And there were 3 primary implementation items identified underneath that. So the first of which was looking at what could we do in partnering with the business community, with the Chamber of Commerce, to really try to start what we were calling a Beautify Moscow program, where we could work with the community, work with business members to look at opportunities to encourage overall property maintenance, and whether that's weed removal, and also look for opportunities where street trees or landscaping could be installed. We've done similar types of projects in the past, well, specifically when we were doing the Troy Highway reconstruction, where we actually had city crews go in, remove asphalt in existing asphalt areas. We brought in landscape materials and actually planted landscaping. This was near Pittsburgh People 2 and Nampa Auto Parts on the Troy Highway. And then essentially the businesses agreed to do long-term maintenance of those flower beds and those plantings, and that was a great partnership opportunity for us to look at sites where landscaping could be installed and street trees could be installed through these corridors. So there's a significant element there to look at what can we do to partner with the Chamber, and the Chamber's indicated significant interest for us to pursue that project. The second implementation item underneath that objective was to increase city efforts at targeted weed control and removal within the entry corridors and the adjacent public properties. There was weeds were a common theme in comments that we heard from the steering committee members when they went out and reviewed the community. There also were common comments that we received from the public as a whole. It's just looking at an overall higher level of maintenance of either the roadway edge or areas of the path or even private properties where there was a significant amount of weed growth that was present. And so there's opportunities for us to partner with the Chamber to work with the business community on their own property, but also the city has an opportunity to look at ways that we could improve our efforts in maintaining public property through town to ensure that we don't have unsightly weed growth on public properties. And the last implementation action was to increase street tree installations along city entry corridors. And we would look at opportunities for establishing those street trees in the corridors to help soften the edge and improve the overall appearance of those corridors. The objective number 2 was to review landscaping and sign clutter near the city welcome signs at the west, north, and east entrances. I apologize, I have objective number 3 there. That's where it went. Anyhow, the overall, the landscaping was done quite some time ago, as Councilmember Steed indicated, nearly 15 years ago. There are areas of landscaping near these signs that certainly could be enlarged, and as you look at the west welcome sign, there is a lot of regulatory signage that's in close proximity to the welcome sign. It is a state line boundary, so you tend to have the welcome to Idaho, speed limit signs, truck permits, but there's a lot of regulatory signage in that area that somewhat detracts from that welcome to Moscow sign. So we wanted to explore opportunities to see if some of that could be slightly spread out from the welcome to Moscow sign so it isn't competing and cluttering in that area. Objective number 3 was to design and construct targeted landscape improvements within key visual areas within each corridor. And so these were those sites that we had identified for both focal projects as well as just general corridor enhancements. And I'll kind of walk through a few of those. There are really 2 sites within each corridor, so a total of 8 sites that were identified as being potential improvement design candidates. I'll have maps of each of those after this slide, but I'll talk kind of generally. The western corridor, the first site that was identified was that location between Hatley Way and Pullman Road, between the entrance, essentially the western and eastern entrance into U-Haul and Warbonnet. So there's a section of what's purely state highway right-of-way. I'm going to flip to the map, just it might be easier. So as you look to the west, it's this area highlighted in blue. So this is the Pullman Highway, and this is Hatley Way as it goes up to the Walmart entrance. And at this line where the Walmart landscaping ends, essentially is the right-of-way boundary. And this is just kind of an empty turfed area that receives very little maintenance. I don't believe is irrigated. And it was kind of that key area where you had this nice landscaping from the mall, and then essentially it breaks down from U-Haul out to Warbonnet. And so that was identified as that high priority area from the community during the open house meeting. And this is a site that the committee felt could be a candidate for a landscape improvement design and installation. Within the western corridor, the other element of consideration was just the overall improvement of existing commercial property. So as you moved to the east of this point, all the way down to really the Llewellyn 3rd and Pullman Highway intersection, there were opportunities for street tree installations in areas and commercial sites that were developed before there were any type of landscaping standards. And again, that kind of fall under the objective number 1, which was to try to partner with the business community along that corridor. But the next site that actually picked up with a potential city improvement recommendation was that intersection of Llewellyn and 3rd. There is a small landscape island in between 3rd Street and the Pullman Highway, and there is some excess right-of-way on the north side of the roadway there that could be improved with landscaping and other enhancements in that section.
When you're finished with that one, Bill, would you step back to Line Street sidewalk?
Correct. And then one just before this Llewellyn, I actually don't have a shot of the map, but at the Line Street intersection, and there were in the public open house and with the steering committee, there were a number of comments that were made upon the appearance of the south side of the Pullman roadway from Perimeter Drive essentially to Line Street. And that property is currently owned by the university. A lot of it was historical railroad corridor that they only obtained fairly recently. And the university has had an interest to try to improve the entrances, both stadium from perimeter entryway to stadium to line, with enhancements that are somewhat similar, maybe a slightly different scale than the Sweet Avenue entry elements. And those are currently in design and plan to be under construction next year. That also leaves several large sections of property in between those entrances that the university still wishes to desire, and you'll see that falls under objective number 5. But at specifically at the Line Street intersection, they'll be doing some substantial amount of improvements on the west side of Line Street. They'll be doing an entry monument feature, some landscape enhancements. But the east side of Line is currently somewhat unimproved. It's the old railroad corridor crossing, so there's no curbing present. There are no sidewalks present.
That's not somewhat, Bill. That's totally unimproved.
Totally unimproved. It is paved, so it is paved to the shoulder line. But there was a concept of could the city come in and do a sidewalk installation to fill in a gap in the sidewalk system, and also help finish out the east side of that roadway to mirror the improvements that the university would be making on the west side of the roadway there. So that's identified as 3233 in the west corridor. So so if you looked at the west, there were the two sites that were identified for potential improvement designs were this site near Hatley and Moorbonnet, and this site at the Llewellyn intersection. As we looked at the north corridor, there were really two sites that were identified for potential design consideration. The first of which was the north corridor, really picking up from Rodeo on north up to the entrance to Quail Run, and predominantly looking at potential landscape, tree installations, and screening that could occur on the west side of the roadway there. And then the second site that was identified were enhancements to the south couplet location. There are a couple splitter islands that are located here near the C Street intersection. One of those is currently landscaped. The other one is currently just asphalt covered. And then there are sidewalk improvements on the east side from really C up until you get nearly near the gas station property, that you have some historical driveway approaches that have been blocked off, but the sidewalk's in poor repair. There's cross slope issues and just overall look to be in poor condition. So there are frontage improvements, there are landscape improvements, and then looking at street tree installations along the west side of the corridor there, and then down on the west side of Main Street. And the west side of Main Street really ties into another council goal, which was to expand the perceived area of downtown on Main Street up to really the identified was the bottom of the E Street intersection. But there are opportunities along the west side of Main where we have wider walks that could accommodate tree wells and street tree plantings along that west side that could all be tied in as kind of one common project in that location. As we looked at the east, the committee felt that really the Mountain View intersection, the current Welcome to Moscow sign is actually located about a quarter mile east of the city limit boundaries, so it's out near the Parker Farm property. And you really don't feel like you've arrived in town until you hit about the Mountain View intersection. That's really where you make that transition from a fairly rural area to the more urbanized, developed area. And there are potential landscape improvements, tree installations that could occur in proximity to the Mountain View intersection. The committee felt that would help reinforce that appearance and that impression as people actually get the first view of Moscow as they come in from the east. There's also another location near the White and Steiner and Troy Highway intersection. There could be some enhancements and improvements. There's an old kind of concrete guardrail and metal handrail that's located on the north side of the roadway there. There's some kind of Jersey barricades on the south, and then the city owns the trail property where the Paradise Path is located on the south side of the highway there, and the committee identified that as another location along that corridor that could receive some enhancements. There could be some potential opportunity for public art integration along that guardrail, handrail location. And then another item that actually came to the city's attention as part of the project is that billboard is located on the city's property. And so there is a current existing lease on the property for that until 2018. And so there is an opportunity for the city to remove that at the termination or end of that lease that would help improve the appearance of that intersection as well.